Some guy asked me once, he said, smoke in the water? Yeah. He said, is it true you guys set fire to an island? So there are myths around, yeah. The truth actually is very real and almost mundane. We were trying to make a record without using a studio. That was the basic reason we were there. We wanted to make a recording in a live venue, basically for the sound. Not because studios were kind of very dead, and you hit a drum and it disappeared, you know. And we looked around all around Europe just to find a place. And the casino in Montreux, in Switzerland, if you were doing a tour of Europe, you'd play there. It wasn't just a casino, it was a venue, restaurants, bars, discotheques. It was a big complex, big television thing. Golden Rose of Montreux is out of there. And we arrived there with the Rolling Stones mobile unit to set up on the stage. We had about, I think, a 3-week window where there was nothing happening.
The Rolling Truck Stones thing?
The Rolling Truck Stones thing, yes. You got it right. And we arrived there with all the gear and the roadies and engineers and stuff like that. And the guy who was organising it, Claude Nobbs, said, don't put your gear in yet, because there's one more show to go before you can do it. It's a matinee tomorrow afternoon, Frank Zappa and the Mothers, 3 o'clock. Do you want to go? Sure, yeah. So we went along to watch it, and they put a little special seating thing, but we were in the audience with everyone else. And about an hour into the show, someone fired a flare gun into the ceiling, which was made of, it was like a false ceiling bamboo.
The whole building was made of wood.
And there wasn't much of a fire at first, but things came to a halt and everyone was ordered to leave the building. And there was a little bit of a panic, but not bad. I mean, no one was hurt, strangely enough. I went back into the building after we'd left because I got separated from the others. And I remember standing in front of the stage, which is about a couple of feet high, and on the stage was all Frank Zappa's equipment, and I was particularly interested in Moog synthesizers, which were brand new. I'd never seen one before, and I'm, wow, that's a synthesizer, wow, and the knobs, you know. Anyway, no one was around, so I almost casually wandered out again and hooked up with everyone, and literally within 5 minutes or so, the place was an inferno. Right. It was a big building, and it took hours. In fact, it burned all the afternoon, all the evening, and the next morning we went there, it was still smouldering. You know, it was a huge fire. And it's amazing that no one got hurt. The whole place went down, which left us in a quandary, you know, nowhere to record. Frank Zappa was probably in more of a quandary, he'd lost all his gear. So we looked around for somewhere to base ourselves. And it's actually hard to find a place where you can make a lot of noise without keeping the neighbours awake. We started work in one place, which was a theatre in town, another theatre in town. We did one track there, which in fact was going to be Smoke on the Water.
It's the Dan Dan song.
And the police were hammering on the door. We actually did the track about 1 or 2 in the morning after spending all evening, you know, rehearsing and getting sounds and stuff. So we obviously couldn't use that place. And we got a little bit desperate. And we looked at all sorts, we looked in the basement of the Palace Hotel, anywhere that was, you know, where you could make some noise. And we eventually found this place called the Grand Hotel, which was closed for the season. And the ground floor corridor had sort of marble walls and seemed to have the right kind of acoustics. And so we basically ended up there and running out of time. It was cold, we had an industrial heater, we got a carpenter in to put a couple of walls. We really did put mattresses up in the windows. And, so the album was made under kind of desperate conditions. And the song really is just about that. If every line in the song is true.
No, I think that was the title. Rog, when the thing was burning down, he reckons it was a couple of days later. Memories change and alter over the years. I reckon it was at the Eden Lac when we were sitting watching the casino burning down. The downdraft from the mountains was blowing the flames, but more particularly the smoke, across Lake Geneva. And that was a memory that I shall never forget. And so I like to think that what we do agree on is that Rog wrote Smoke on the Water on a napkin. When it actually happened is lost in the mists of time.
Initially, Ian and I left in '73. David Caldell, Glenn Hughes came in for a couple of albums, a couple of years. Richie left, Tommy Bolan came in for one album. And the band actually split in '76 and didn't start up again until '84, till Perfect Strangers.
Okay.
If you think actually about a family, how a family is, you grow up, you have kids, and the grandparents, parents, children, generations living in the same house. You get fed up with each other. People come, people go off and get married. People have affairs. There's the black sheep of the family. All these things happen within a musical context, except it's even more complex because you have to add the musical element. So we have to actually agree on a functioning role for the whole family. It's like a board meeting. So unless there's one entire dominant, megalomanic leader of the band, which I did try once or twice but it failed, but and then Richie had a go and he failed too. Basically we operate like a family. It's a consensual thing. If somebody doesn't want to do something, they don't do it. But that, I think, is probably the easiest way to understand, because everyone can relate to that. The difficulties that come forward when you're trying to not consciously hold the band. I had no idea that this would still be going when we first started, and it's become, to a certain extent, because we're always thinking forward about music and the next tour, and I think that's what the bond is with the Deep Purple fans. And as I said earlier, it's nothing to do with the industry as such, but that's what has been the driving force. There has been a target there, even though it's an elusive one.
As Ian said earlier, the influences in this band are many and varied. We all have different musical backgrounds and we embrace them all. I mean, classical music, jazz music, blues, rock, pop, it's all a mix-up. And that's why if you have to attach any kind of label to us, it's rock.
Heavy, will, of course, deny giving birth to any of the aforementioned.
Heavy metal, to me, seems to be they've taken a small part of what we were part of. That means that the loud and the screaming part. They've just taken those two bits, and that's all it is. So heavy metal, to me, is a very shallow music.
It is.
Because it's bereft of all the influences, in fact, that we grew up with.
Yeah.
So that's why I can't relate to it. And when people say, oh, it was because of you that we did, okay, very nice, but I don't feel any kind of emotional connection there, and the only thing I feel like saying is, well, sorry.
Yeah. And I'm with him on that, and so is everyone in the band. I think it's one of the few things we can all agree upon.
No, we can't.
Yes, we can.
No, we can't.
Well, all right. But I think the idea of actually listing the elements that Roger was talking about, it does range. I mean, if you just look at within our band, and then look at Led Zeppelin, and look at, I mean, Sabbath were probably the nearest to pure, because they were all thinking the same way. And when I heard what was coming out of Seattle 10 years ago, I mean, I could absolutely make the connection with Tony Iommi's chord structure and guitar sound and the tuning down bit and everything else. I mean, I thought that is pure, undiluted influence. But Sabbath were all much of a muchness. They all had a similar focus. Deep Purple is a different thing altogether. I mean, Roger comes from a background which is heavily laden with what you might term folk music. Richie Blackmore came from pure English rock and roll, where the guitar took over. I mean, because guitars were basically jangly banjo things in pop music up until that point, but this is the pre-Jeff Beck thing, the pre-Clapton thing, or whatever, that old style where you had to sort of put a bit of excitement in but behave yourself at the same time. And so he developed a great technique. John Lord grew up in the, in the classical mould. He studied classical composition, and he was also a Jimmy Smith fan, so his roots were in classical composition and in keyboard jazz. Ian Pace grew up in the Buddy Rich School of Music, so there you've got big band influences and that sort of thing. And I grew up in Hounslow, so I mean...
When I joined Purple, I was actually blown away with the musicality of Richie, John, and Ian Pace.
Et moi?
And you and I, in fact, were songwriters of a different breed.
Yeah.
We're not, I don't consider myself a virtuoso bass player. I consider myself a songwriter who happens to play bass. And I think the magic of that lineup, that Mark II lineup, was you had this pyrotechnical virtuosity on one hand, and you had a kind of almost naive songwriting, a simple songwriting approach on the other. And it was the mix of those two things. Because if you get a band that's all good players, chances are they're just going to go nowhere because they go over people's heads. And if you've got a band that's all naive, raw, it doesn't have any kind of depth to it. So that's why I think the combination works. And yeah, I think the virtuosity is an important element. It's something that a lot of bands don't have. And when Richie left 7 years ago, what kind of guitarist we're going to get? To me, it was very important that we had a balance to John Lord. It was always keyboard and guitar pivot around which Deep Purple focused. And so he had to be, whoever it was we got, had to be a master of his instrument. And Steve Morse is every bit a master of his instrument.
Richie left in the middle of a tour, which put us in a difficult position. So we were... Joe Satriani filled in for a year, and filled in a few dates and stayed a year, and has since become a great friend. But he was a thorough professional, and everyone knows about Joe Satriani. But then when we had to get somebody permanent into the band, because the recording studio was looming, and we had to settle the issue. Joe was not available. He had loads of commitments, and I don't think Joe, with love and respect for the dear man, would have been the right guitar player anyway for Deep Purple in the long term, even though we were all very tempted because he's an endearing man, and I think personalities are very much a part of the issue. So this is how I like to tell the story. The management said, well, you've got to make a decision, any ideas? And I think we all put our ideas down on a piece of paper, and we were most of us using faxes in those days. And so you got these things, and there was one name that was on everybody's list, and that was Steve. And so only one telephone call was made, and Steve said he only had one question: is there a dress code? And we said, well, let's get together, we'll have a little jam, work out a few songs, do a couple of shows in Mexico and somewhere in Texas that no one's ever been to or will go again. And then we'll see if it's going to work. And we were thrilled to bits, and the chemistry worked straight away. It was good musical sex, is what I'm saying. And so I was intrigued then to find, because I haven't got much time for banjo players, as I call them, because I've had bad experiences with them in the past. So and because they're so self-important and have been, and all that stupid posturing and everything else that used to be our province of the singers, So you know what I'm saying. And I was absolutely thrilled by his personal dignity and his reputation, which of course I didn't know much about, apart from my knowledge of his music. I discovered that, I think it was Guitar Player magazine, in any event by his peers, he'd been voted the #1 guitar player in the world for 5 years on the trot. And on the 6th year, he was asked to step aside, make room for somebody else. And on the 6th year, Joe Satriani won it, which I think was a lovely story. And I think we look back at various key moments in our lives, like you do in your family life, personal life. A memory, a song goes with a romantic moment, or a holiday or a vacation or something significant in your life. And that was a great moment when Steve joined, because it was regained confidence for all of us then. I think the idea... I've got this theory that it's just a little rule for me that clearly defines what an artist's responsibilities are. And it's one thing, and that's to be expressive. And if you're lacking in confidence or you're overconfident, you're not being truly expressive. But if you're the more natural you can be, then you get to the real issue. And I think that's what Steve brought into the band again. He gave us all a regained confidence. And And I've enjoyed every single moment. That's not true. I've enjoyed...
Well, there's a dressing room in Romford.
Things I can tell you. Well, you're missing all the best bits. if we can only tell you the stuff that convention will allow, then it's going to be boring. But I remember difficult moments. Okay, just a flash past of things that come into my mind. I remember crying, weeping with happiness at the Speakeasy. I mean, I tried not to show it, but I was just, after years of, Roger explained that we were in a band together for 5 years. We'd all been playing for years before then as well. But the sheer thrill of being in the band, and I thought, this is it. This is what I've been searching for. I remember that moment. I remember falling down the stairs at the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam when I was ill. I remember the disaster at the Hollywood Bowl with the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra, the worst orchestra I've ever heard in my life. I remember doing Nebworth when we flew in helicopters over an English village, and there were, I forget, something like 80,000 people in this muddy field, and it was piddling down with rain and had been for a week, I think, and they were up to here in mud and gore. I'd been there the day before to do interviews with Tommy Vance and various other people, and there was a huge media interest there. But for all of that and all the little stories attached to it, it was a big gig for us. But out of all the chaos, the helicopters, can't they take off from an airfield near where I was living? And yeah, but we got to stay low, and massive, great helicopter, about 8 of us as passengers in there. And as we flew over Nebworth in this, torrential downpour, I was going, I don't believe it. In the village, on the village green, they were playing cricket. I thought, this must be the beer lake from last week or something like that. And I thought, it was so uplifting just to see, out of confusion, in your career and in your life, and personal things come and go, you have ups and downs, and sometimes you doubt your own judgment. Sometimes you sicken yourself with your self-regard and things like that. So there are times when, as you grow older, you develop a philosophy that enforces you to take a humility pill every morning in this business. Otherwise, you'd lose your sanity completely. And sometimes it sticks in your craw, but you have to go through the ritual. And little moments like that, you just think, well, it's I am normal after all. Because if they think I'm crazy, then what's going on here? This is part of my culture, and I adore it. So that was a great moment, a sort of music life flash-by thing, And of course, the greatest moment in my entire life was when QPR beat West Bromwich in 1967 at Wembley, the first third division side ever to win a cup final at Wembley.
And Roger?
The day you read Rodney Marsh was probably yours.
It's very difficult, actually, to find any particular moment. And like Ian, that they flash past. So many gigs. There's a website that lists every gig we ever did. And I looked at it.
It's called www.gillan.com.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Well, that's the one I was looking at.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, I was looking at it, and over the years, there's so many gigs and tours that I almost got tired looking at it. And it's every single date, you realise that's 24 hours of your life, at least. That's a journey to get there, that's a preparation, that's an adrenaline rush, that's going on stage, just, a whole lot involved in each show. I remember going to Japan for the first time and being amazed when we did Child in Time on stage that the entire audience knew every single word. And I suppose that was an eye-opener. I suddenly realised the power of, I guess, media, of which we were a part, but the power of the written word, the power of an image or an expression is almost overwhelming, and you kind of, in a way, want to be a bit more responsible about it. Although I don't think we're that responsible, we just follow our own instincts. But that was a good lesson. the Albert Hall, when we did the orchestra in '99, the emotion in the room when we came on stage was absolutely wonderful. It was almost like a summing up of 30 years, because it was bits and pieces from all our solo careers, as well as Deep Purple, as well as the concerto. It was a great event. And I think the other really great event was the writing session for Perpendicular. We found Steve Morse, we did the gigs in Mexico, and we had about a month or so in the studio just writing songs. And I think Deep Purple had been through really a 10-year decline, during which we'd had spotty albums, spotty tours. Ian been thrown out of the band, got back in again. It was, a painful period in many ways. And I think a lot of fans left us there. I think Deep Purple was at an all-time low in 93, 94. 94, 95 is when Steve joined. And that writing session, we all came alive again after that. We all, as Ian said, we all became confident. What Steve brought to the band was a freshness that we all embraced, and we could not stop writing stuff. And it was a magic period. And really, where we are now is from that writing period. That was the start of the phoenix rising again for Deep Purple, And I think we've weathered that storm. And I think, right now, someone recognized me, or recognized the shirt I was wearing some time ago, 15 years ago. He said, "Oh, Deep Purple." Not realizing that I was in it. He said, "Oh, Deep Purple, yeah, they're not as good as they used to be." And I didn't argue with him then, but I would now, because I think we're every bit as good as we ever were.
I do too.
In some ways better.
In your 30s and early 40s, you're still chasing your tail, you're still trying to be that sort of stick insect, sort of immortal young 20-something that can behave badly and get away with it because it's expected. But with a newfound maturity, there's a certain, there's a genetic problem here, because we do expect people to mature. At the same time, you want to hang on to the rebel is still beating fiercely in my heart. But I have to articulate it in a different way. I can't just take up a club and smash someone down to the ground. You're expected to be a little more dignified with age. And I think that all of this forced us, some survived and some didn't, and it forced us into an acceptance of our maturity. And within that maturity, we've found no threat, because we're just what we are. And the joy of playing music has never been purer than it is now. We've got a wonderful history, which we're not ashamed of, and we've got a wonderful future, which is exciting, and every turn we take. We're not on the rock and roll highway anymore. We're taking the scenic route now, and it's unbelievably exciting. And as Rog said, I think we're as good as we ever were, if not better. And if that sounds like a self-serving comment, it's probably because we don't get the opportunity with the media to express ourselves and what we're about. They have preconceived ideas of heavy metal music, groups, historical items and bits and pieces. And history's been, to a certain extent, written by television, or can I say rewritten by television. And it's not entirely true, most of it. It's a perceived and convenient point of view. So it's nice to have this chance to sort of say it how it is.
Especially in the rock world. There's maybe pop music's a whole different matter, but in the rock world, people see you as being real if you're not trying to be someone you're not. And I think one of the things I've learned, and we've learned as a band, is really to be ourselves. And that's again part of maturity. We are part of a business that is very much two-headed. The pop music side of thing, the boy bands, and there's always been pop music, and there's nothing wrong with pop music, that's fine, but I think rock music is a different kettle of fish. It's not concerned so much with image and trend and fashion and the mercurial nature of pop music. Rock music is more to do with a life rather than a couple of weeks.